Good morning. This is an unexpectedly happy moment for us to be sitting up on this stage together, because last year at this time, Vladimir was sitting in solitary confinement in a Siberian prison, facing a 25-year sentence, which in his case was a death sentence because he had been poisoned twice by the Putin regime. Evgenia was here fighting for Vladimir's release, and Evgenia and I were traveling the world, meeting with government officials, politicians, activists, journalists, doing everything we can to get Vladimir out. And so the fact that we have Vladimir sitting here, alive, healthy, and with the fight in him is a true triumph. I thought it would be interesting and helpful to talk you all through our joint journey, because it's been a journey with a lot of different chapters. The first chapter in this journey was after my lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, was murdered in Russia in 2009. I went on a campaign to get justice for Sergei. And when it became clear that there was no possibility of getting justice in Russia, I said, how do we get justice outside of Russia? And I came upon this idea, which was to freeze the assets and ban the travel of the people who killed Sergei and the people who commit similar human rights abuses in Russia. And without invitation, and sort of out of nowhere, emerges this young man, a lot younger than me, Vladimir Kara-Murza. And I met him for the first time in the Canadian Parliament. They invited me to testify, and they invited this young Russian opposition member to testify. And he was so good and so impressive that he became a regular part of the Magnitsky campaign. And Vladimir, maybe you could tell our friends here why you got involved in the Magnitsky campaign and the consequences of your involvement in the Magnitsky campaign.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Bill. Wonderful to see all of you here in this room, and it does have very special meaning for me to be back here in Oslo, back here at this forum, back anywhere really, because up until a few months ago, I was certain that I would never be anywhere again outside that 2x3 meter cell in a solitary confinement at a maximum security prison in Western Siberia. But what happened last August, this miracle, which I believe that exchange was, an exchange that saved 16 people, 8 of whom were Russian political prisoners from the hell of Vladimir Putin's modern-day gulag. That miracle was made possible by all of you, by public opinion and democratic nations, by people who never stopped advocating, speaking, shouting about all of those locked up in prisons in Putin's Russia for the only crime of opposing his brutal dictatorship and his war of aggression in Ukraine. And this just goes to show that advocacy matters, that public attention saves, and that democracies and good people in democracies, when they stand together and when they stand on values, they're much stronger than any dictatorship can ever hope to be. So there are no words that will be adequate enough to express the gratitude I feel today. But at the same time, every minute of every day, I think about all of those who have been left behind. Russia today, according to publicly known figures from human rights groups, has more than 3,000 political prisoners. Just to put things in context, in the mid-1980s, towards the later Soviet period, the whole of the Soviet Union, which is 15 countries put together, had about 700. Today, Russia alone has 3,000. Belarus has more than 2,000. So the two last dictatorships of Europe, Russia and Belarus together, has more than 5,000 people. And for so many of them, just as it was for us in that exchange last year, this is not only a question of unlawful, unjust, politically motivated imprisonment, it is actually a question of life or death. And we need to do everything we can to make sure that we stand up for those people whose only crime is that they spoke the truth. On the Magnitsky Act, this year actually marks 15 years since I first joined this effort. I remember one day Boris Nemtsov, the leader of the Russian opposition, who was murdered on Putin's orders directly in front of the Kremlin 10 years ago this year. He called me. This was the autumn of 2010. There were congressional elections going on in America. And there was this bill that was introduced at Bill Browder's initiative by, I believe it was Jim McGovern and Ilyana Ros-Lehtinen. Those were the two original co-sponsors. And the bill did what Sir William just said it would do, impose targeted personal sanctions against people involved in the enormous tax fraud that Sergei Magnitsky has uncovered, in his own unlawful persecution and imprisonment and death. And Boris had this idea, why don't we widen this bill? Why don't we widen the scope and make sure that it covers not just the Magnitsky case, but all human rights abuses in Russia? Because one of the biggest characteristics, I guess, of the Putin regime, apart from its brutality, apart from its belligerence, apart from its repressiveness, is its hypocrisy. Because for years and years and years, these people in and around the Kremlin have gotten used to stealing in Russia, but then spending and stashing away all that money in the West. The same people who talk on their propaganda TV channels about Western decadence, who have destroyed all the basic tenets of democratic society in our country, in Russia, but they very much enjoy on a personal level, very much like to enjoy all the benefits and the privileges and the opportunities that democratic societies offer, because all of their bank accounts happen to be in the West. Their children happen to study in schools in the West. The West is where they have their yachts and their villas and their apartments, and that's where they send their wives and their mistresses on shopping trips and so on. And we decided that it's time to put a stop to that. And when we began this campaign, I remember our first meetings in American Congress together with Boris Nemtsov. This was in the autumn of 2010. A lot of people would just say, guys, you're not going to get anywhere with this, because there are so many powerful interests on the Western side also, who are never going to let this happen, because I mentioned the hypocrisy that's on the Putin side. But then, of course, there was also another side, and that is enabling on the part of Western countries, who allowed this dirty, corrupt money, or blood-stained money in many cases, to flow in their banks, into their financial system, into their real estate market, and so on. It always takes two to tango, right? It is said that the largest export from the Putin regime to the West is not oil or gas, it is corruption. And I fully share that sentiment, but except, of course, it takes two sides for that equation. For somebody to be able to export corruption, somebody else has to be willing to import it, and there was no shortage. But fast forwarding it to today, I'm happy and proud to say that 35 different countries and jurisdictions around the world have these laws on the books, laws that lay down a very simple premise, that those people, not just in Russia, but anywhere in the world, who are engaged in human rights abuses, violations of the rule of law, and corruption will no longer be able to receive visas on assets or use the financial and banking system of those countries.
So it was Vladimir's unbelievably visible, effective work that very much got the Magnitsky Act in place. And Vladimir Putin hated the Magnitsky Act pretty much more than anything else. In fact, he made it his single largest foreign policy priority after it was passed to repeal the Magnitsky Act. And because of Vladimir's work, they tried to kill him twice with poison in 2015 and 2017. And then when he went back to Russia to protest the war in 2022, he called Putin a murderer on CNN. 12 hours later, he was arrested, and he was sentenced to 25 years in prison, which was the longest sentence for any political prisoner in Russia. And that was because they hated him so much because of the Magnitsky Act. And I'd like to bring Evgenia in now to this conversation. Vladimir is now in a cell, in a 4x6 cell in solitary confinement in Siberia. Evgenia, what did you do? What did you do to get Vladimir out?
Well, first of all, I want to say that it's such a pleasure to be here, to be back at the Oslo Freedom Forum. And it's a very emotional time for me here this year, because this is the first time that Vladimir and I come here together. As to the last... I love you too, Masi. As far as the last, over 3 years are concerned, since the launch of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by the regime in the Kremlin, I don't think that I had a choice, really. I don't think that I had many options. I have spent over 20 years with this particular guy, and I've always known who I'm married to. And the moment he ended up behind bars, I realized that the best way I could help him was by continuing his work. I knew that what these regimes want is to silence us. They want to make sure that our voices are not heard, that our work is stopped. And I wanted to make sure that Vladimir's work continued. I wanted to make sure that his voice continued to be heard, that the work on the Magnitsky, that the work in support of political prisoners in Russia, that the work against Putin's aggression continued. So I thought that was the best thing I could do for my partner in life and in crime. I'm married to a traitor and a foreign agent and... disseminator of bullying. Yes, all of that. He's a toughened criminal, this one. But that was the best thing I could do for him, and that was the best thing I could do for those of my compatriots I'm proud of. For all those in Russia and outside of Russia who stood up and said, no, we're not okay with this war. We're not okay with a regime of murderers in the Kremlin who steals and kills, and these are the only things they know how to do. So I thought, they're being silenced by the regime. As Vladimir mentioned, there are over 3,000 political prisoners in Russia today, and this is a very conservative estimate by human rights groups. And I wanted to make sure that the voices are heard. So it truly matters a lot to me that this exchange that brought Vladimir back was instrumental in freeing 16 people, and 8 of them were Russian political prisoners, because those Western governments that advocated for their release didn't have to do this, but they stood by what was right. They made sure that they sent a clear message to the Kremlin. We know who the real criminals are, and we're going to be standing with those who oppose this criminal regime. And both the campaign for the release of political prisoners and the Magnitsky campaign makes me think of something Nelson Mandela said: it always seems impossible until it's done. And I think this is a very good illustration of what some of us come to celebrate here at the Oslo Freedom Forum, those victories. Even they seem like small victories compared to what these regimes are doing to us, to the world. And some people come here for that strength, to learn from others, to get that, to feel that solidarity. And this is, I think, the value of this forum. This is not just a platform. And I cannot say how grateful I was for this platform, because I could tell Vladimir's story and I could tell the story of my country. But this is also an amazing community. And I want to welcome all of those who came here for the first time. You will find solidarity here, you will find strength, you will find knowledge, you will find skills, and you will be able to tell your stories and make your voices heard. This is what makes this community so special. This is what makes this community so powerful, that we come here to learn from each other. And just we arrived yesterday and we already saw our wonderful friend, Masih Alinejad, this amazing fighter for human rights, for women's rights in Iran. We saw our good friend, Felix Maradiaga from Nicaragua. On the screen, I saw Paul Rusesabagina and his wonderful adopted daughters, Anais and Karin Kanimba. And, so many friends. Leopoldo Lopez, he might be in this room somewhere. So many friends. And I'm truly, truly grateful for this forum and for the work it does and for the community it creates for all of us. And I know that we are stronger together. In the words of another great human rights fighter, Martin Luther King, freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It has to be demanded by the oppressed. Well, we're all here to demand freedom, to demand respect for our rights, to make sure that no voice is left unheard. And using such mechanisms as the Magnitsky Act, we can continue with this work. I feel such warmth in my heart when I hear our friends and colleagues from different countries, from Iran, from Venezuela, demanding Magnitsky sanctions, the use of Magnitsky sanctions against human rights perpetrators in their countries. Because it started with Sergei Magnitsky, it then encompassed all human rights violators in Russia, and now it has become a global Magnitsky Act that goes after and brings to accountability human rights violators around the world. And this is, yet again, an illustration of those words. It always seems impossible until it's done.
Bill, if I could just add very briefly, 200 years ago this year, in 1825, there was an attempted insurrection in Russia. These were the nobles, military officers who were the victors in the Napoleonic Wars, and they attempted an insurrection to replace autocracy with a constitutional system. Now, the Tsar Nicholas I clamped down very harshly. The main leaders were hanged. Many others, dozens, were sent to permanent exile in Siberia. And then their wives did something that nobody expected of them. The wives, because unlike the Soviet regime, the Tsarist regime did not fight families. They only fought its opponents, right? So the wives could have stayed back in the comfort of their stately mansions in St. Petersburg and continued to enjoy, their aristocratic lifestyle. But instead, they took up on their own shoulders everything that their imprisoned husbands were no longer able to do. They followed them back to Siberia. And so since then, for 200 years now in Russia, we have this expression, Decembrist wives, meaning that the strong women who take everything upon themselves where their husbands are no longer able to do this. We have many bad traditions that are returned in our country nowadays, but this one very good tradition survives and stays and lives. And just as 200 years ago, everything in Russia today still stands on strong women, as I think you've just had a chance to hear.
We can end with that.
Вас обосрали полностью.